We begin in Britain, where the Supreme Court has ruled that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament was unlawful. The decision means lawmakers can reassemble, quote, as soon as possible, which would deal a hammer blow to Johnson's plans for taking Britain out of the EU. The unanimous verdict found that the suspension prevented Parliament from doing its job without reasonable justification. Supreme Court head Brenda Hale had this to say.
Parliament has not been prorogued. This is the unanimous judgment of all 11 justices. It is for Parliament, and in particular the Speaker and the Lord Speaker, to decide what to do next. Unless there is some parliamentary rule of which we are unaware, they can take immediate steps to enable each House to meet as soon as possible. It is not clear to us that any step is needed from the Prime Minister, but if it is, the Court is pleased that his counsel have told the Court that he will take all necessary steps to comply with the terms of any declaration made by this Court.
So that was the presiding judge of the Supreme Court, Brenda Hale. Let's now go straight to the Supreme Court in London, where our correspondent Charlotte Potts is standing by. Charlotte, a unanimous decision from the 11 judges. Tell us more about what was said and what this means.
What a momentous and historic ruling here in the United Kingdom today. We have to remind ourselves this was a power struggle between the executive, the legislative and the judiciative. Basically, Boris Johnson overstepping his powers as Prime Minister, as the Supreme Court just ruled in proroguing Parliament and sending them on this forced break. And the Supreme Court, with Lady Hale there presiding as the Chief Justice, ruled that it was not a normal prorogation, not a normal short prorogation, but a longer one that kept Parliament from debating matters, especially, of course, Brexit related at this crucial time in UK history. So what we are seeing right now is the first reactions coming in to this momentous ruling. And those are, for example, from John Bercow, the Speaker of Parliament, has said that Parliament should now reconvene immediately. So that means that MPs will be assembling probably tomorrow and start debating all matters Brexit again. And we've also heard from the Labour opposition calls for the Prime Minister to resign. When this ruling came out here at the Supreme Court in London, we've heard tremendous cheers from demonstrators who had assembled here despite the rain this morning, calling for Johnson to resign and celebrating a victory for, well, democracy and for the strengthening of Parliament.
So cheers from some, but a huge setback for Boris Johnson. Do we know what this means for him and how he's likely to react?
Well, of course, this is an absolute blow for Boris Johnson. He right now is in New York at the UN General Assembly. It's about 6 a.m. there, so somebody will have woken him up by now, or he has followed this, of course, from his hotel room. And it is a huge blow. The pressure will mount on him to resign, because essentially what this ruling means is that he misled the Queen in advising her to send Parliament on break, that he was lying to the Queen and giving that his motivation was to silence Parliament. And of course that doesn't go down well here in Great Britain, so we will see strong reactions there from the opposition party. And of course this is a huge humiliation for Boris Johnson, who is due to hold his first big speech at the UN General Assembly tonight in front of world leaders and all the European leaders that he is negotiating at the moment a new deal for the UK to leave the European Union with. So a huge humiliation there, and we'll probably most likely see a Boris Johnson that has to take this ruling in the course of the day in New York.
So, of course, reactions coming in thick and fast. We've just heard the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, has called on Boris Johnson to resign. And, of course, Boris Johnson had never indicated that he would resign, even if he faced a setback. So now tell us, Charlotte, what happens next? You mentioned the Speaker of Parliament, John Bercow, saying that the Parliament can resume as soon as possible.
Exactly. So we have to reiterate, Boris Johnson has said that, of course, he will follow this ruling from the Supreme Court. He has said that last night, but that he has no intention to resign. What we will see now is Parliament reconvening immediately. That could be in the course of the day tomorrow. The Labour opposition party is just finishing its party conference in the course of the day tomorrow. So we can see Parliament reconvene and then asking Boris Johnson to release documents on all matters Brexit, on his Brexit strategy, on how he was planning to force the European Union into giving him a new deal, and what he was planning in case of a no-deal scenario. So we will see a lot of pressure there on Boris Johnson. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the news that the Labour Party now wants him to resign, and we will have to see how that plays out, because he, of course, is holding his seat in Downing Street and he is not planning on giving that up.
And Charlotte, before I let you go, just tell us a little bit more about the significance of this historic ruling today for Brexit. What does it mean for the actual decision that Boris Johnson always said that it was do and die? He would leave Britain, he'll pull Britain out of the European Union by the 31st of October.
Well, I think it becomes more likely that we will see another extension to Brexit, because that is what Parliament decided should happen, that Boris Johnson should go back to the European Union and ask for another extension beyond October 31st. This ruling from Parliament, a majority of MPs voted for that, became law a couple of weeks ago before Parliament was suspended. And now, with the strengthening of the power of Parliament, it definitely seems like Boris Johnson will have to follow this ruling, and that there is no way out for him, because this really shifted the power away from him, away from the executive, and strengthened Parliament.
DW's Charlotte Potts outside the Supreme Court in London. Thank you very much for your reporting from there.